Hey, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from, again, this strange undisclosed location of the Philanthropy Mastermind series brought to you by our friends at DonorSearch. And once again, if you haven't been here before, welcome. If you've been here before, you've heard me say this, but it bears repeating that we won't be talking about DonorSearch much today. And it's not because we don't care about what they do. We do very much. And we also believe in the work that they do. But in this case, they're providing us a platform to have discussions and provide training with CFRE credit, like today's session, for the sector. And they've been doing that since 2016. In fact, this is episode number 577, if you're counting. And in fact, you can find many of those over on the DonorSearch site at donorsearch.net under the resources tab. Do stick around today to be a part of the conversation as well as the education. You can do that through the chat, and where many of you are already saying hello, I believe. I'm going to go and check that right now. And yes, hello, Robin. Thank you for doing that. And Jonathan, I really appreciate your warming up the chat box. You can use that throughout today as well as the Q&A. We will be monitoring that throughout. And I also want to just make sure that you're still standing or comfortably seated where you are. And I'm going to ask a question I rarely do, which is, what is the temperature where you are today? Because if it's anything like where I am, and I suspect it is, it's hot. This is a hot subject. And look at this, look at the ranges. Yes, 80s and 90s. A shout out to our friends in, 98 in Houston and the West Coast who are really getting slammed right now. So do try to keep cool, have something cool to drink. You're going to enjoy this time. And wow, envious of Los Angeles right now. You're going to enjoy this session with our friend Aaron Straza. Aaron, of course, as you probably know already, is the CEO and Chief Donor Engagement Strategist for aaronstraza.com, the eponymous firm. She's been working in this field for a number of years, and especially over the last decade, with dozens of nonprofits, helping them to tune up what they do in this area of course, giving donors something to care about. That's the name of this session. It's also what she focuses on, and it's something which all of us need to focus on. So it's really a pleasure to welcome Aaron to the Philanthropy Mastermind series. Thank you so much, Aaron, for coming in and sharing today.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks so much, Jay, for inviting me, and to DonorSearch for hosting. I'm thrilled to be here to share a bit about what I've learned over the years for growing a more passionate donor base. Giving donors something to care about, it's something that I love to help nonprofits do. I've learned all of these things through corporate marketing and also through working in nonprofits. And now most of my work is helping nonprofit leaders, directors, development teams to implement and create donor strategies that really click with the donor and help them to understand their role and to get them really excited about the mission at hand. So I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you so much. Well, as we get started, I want to affirm that what I'm going to be talking about here today. Oh, let me share my screen. I'm realizing, Jay, I forgot to share, didn't I? Let's get that started.
I'll
So
let you know when it's live. There
yeah,
we go. Perfect.
there we go. Great. Okay, let me get my screens all settled. Everything's looking good. Wonderful. Um, well, one thing I do want to affirm as we get started here today is that what I'm sharing, these are things that I have used. So they are practical, they are real world, and they are foundational for any nonprofit. So no matter the size of your organization, the size of your budget, whatever the reach of your programming might be, or the cause you might be serving, all of these things can apply in some way. And I'm sure there's going to be something here that's going to be really helpful for you. And I know this is true because really every nonprofit that I speak with is keenly aware of their need for a stronger donor base. And one of the things that I jokingly say is that this is never the case, that nonprofits say, we're all good. We don't need any more funding. This is something that is true across the board, that every nonprofit is looking and hoping to grow their funding sources and to be able to fund more of the good work that they are already doing. Because really, even if you are meeting your budget year after year, most orgs say that they could easily do more good and have a greater impact if only there could be more funding. But those funding sources you have this year may not be the funding sources you'll have next year. Donor cultivating is really never ending. So to grow more funding, you want to help your current donors become stronger allies. You want to draw in new donors to strengthen the donor base and maybe fill the gaps for those donors who ghost you. So that's why every nonprofit org, no matter what, whoever you are, whatever your mission is, you're looking for that secret to grow a passionate donor base. And I hate to break it to you here up front, but there is no magic wand for donor development. You probably know that already. But however, there are some things that you can do that will help you to grow your donor development and your donor relationships. And what you learn and apply, these things that work here, they are kind of magic in terms of when you do them consistently over time, they build and build, and it does make a difference. It does help you in that steady, ongoing work of donor relationship building. And this is what I'm sure most of you are doing, all of you who are attending here today. You are doing this, your donor engagement team is doing this. You know the struggles of developing relationships, deep relationships with your donors. You know that this it can be really tough. Um, and I guess as I try to think through, like, what are those contributing factors? There are lots of reasons why this can be a struggle. Um, there are lots of reasons, and really, these are just a few very broad categories for why this is a struggle and why this is hard work, but good work, and why everyone is looking for that magical solution. Um, Donor giving and commitment can dwindle due to things like shifts in the economy. It pinches household incomes, people shift their priorities, or it could be the ever-growing and crowded landscape of worthy nonprofit causes. They're all pulling from the same donor well, maybe within your community or within your area, or there could be something called donor fatigue. Donor fatigue. I'm sure you've heard of this, and even more likely, you've felt it. You've felt the way that donor fatigue can really zap the energy within your org. Um, I think of it as sort of like this catch-all term. It refers to that weariness that donors are feeling because they do receive so many requests from nonprofits asking for gifts, asking for support, asking for help. It's a type of information overload. So if you just think of yourself as a human being on planet Earth, think of all those messages that we're getting all the time, in any single day. You may have heard that stat. They were saying like maybe we're receiving like 5,000 messages a day. And there are some researchers that are calling that high number into question. And they're saying maybe that should be adjusted into the several hundred messages a day range. But that's still a lot. That's a lot of messages coming in. And so it's things like products to buy and services to try, or like charities to support. That's nonstop information, and it just comes in and it clogs up our thinking. It weighs on our hearts. It's a lot even for us. And so information overload, it is real. It's happening to us and it's happening to your donors. So if you put on your empathy cap here for a moment and consider how full your donors' brains are, they're stuffed with things that they have to care about. Um, they also have personal lives, family issues, they have work, they have other responsibilities, personal commitments, goals, causes. They have a lot that they are caring about. So they're receiving all of these same messages, hundreds a day. Then they hear from you, and maybe it's on a day that they're drained. Maybe it's on a week and they've had too much going on. maybe they're just worn out because they have too many things that they're trying to juggle and too many things calling on their attention. So it's not that they don't care about your cause or even that you have an urgent monetary need. Um, it may be that they just can't deal with one more request right now. So then your request kind of goes to the bottom, and then life gets busy and it doesn't ever come back up to the top. Something has to go, right? Um, and it just sadly maybe it's that your org loses out, at least for today. It's not that they don't care, it's not that they don't want to support you, but they just can't juggle it all the time. So we have to be aware of that as communicators, that it's not personal, it's just sometimes there's just too much happening. And I bet you can sense donor fatigue even if your donors aren't saying, "Hey, I'm tapped out." Your donors don't have to say it for you to say, like, "Oh, we can sense this is happening here. We know this is going on." And in fact, this recent study found that 87% of nonprofit leaders say that donor fatigue is contributing to their financial budgeting struggles. So that's why it's all the more important that you help donors know why your cause is worth caring about. So now we're coming back into some communication issues, which we're going to hit on for the rest of this session. But as you think about what is going on and how donor fatigue is affecting what's going on in your org, I like to think of it as um, kind of like a wilting plant. So whether your donors tell you that they are worn out or not, you can spot it. It's sort of like this wilting plant image that I have here. It's got drooping branches and withered leaves, and it's kind of like how it looks when donors are fatigued and they're worn out and they're not as excited about what it is that you're communicating. You'll start to notice things like a decrease in response from them. Maybe they're not as engaged. Maybe it is they've kind of ghosted you for a little bit. Even donors who are loyal, sometimes you just don't hear from them like you used to. Or maybe you're going to sense some hesitancy from them when you say, "Hey, we'd like you to be involved," or "We have a new opportunity for you to support." And maybe they're kind of giving you this like pushback, like, I can't do it right now. And that can be a sign that they are worn out. And then finally, you would see a drop in giving. And so you're going to notice these things that are happening even if your donors aren't saying it outright. These are kind of like symptoms and signs that donor fatigue is happening. The other thing is, not only will you be able to observe these things, you're also going to hear your internal staff and team start to say certain things that connect back to donor fatigue. So you're going to hear your donor engagement team, your Marcom team start saying things like this: "We spin our wheels creating content, appeals, social posts, and it's nothing but crickets." Our donors seem unsure about the vision. And you think, "Oh my goodness, we're telling you, but how are they still confused?" You hear that a lot. Or, "We don't have many passionate donors. People just don't seem all that excited." And then finally, donor giving has stalled out. So these are things that your internal team, they're saying these things, and it's because they know what's going on. You know what's going on. These are your donors. You know the trends. You know the people in your partnership. These are real concerns and real happenings. And you have to then figure out, okay, all this is happening, but why? What's going on that's creating this environment where things just aren't energized? There's no momentum. What's causing it? And for that, you've got to go a bit deeper, because we've got to figure out, why is it that donors are so worn out? Wilting support is signaling a root issue. So there's something happening below the surface, something that's unique to your org and to your donors. There are some commonalities from org to org, but there's just some things that you're going to have to dig into that and figure out what's really going on down there that's creating this mess up here. And the root of donor fatigue, just across the board as a general statement, is donor apathy. Whenever I see symptoms of donor fatigue, the wilting and the withering of excitement and interest and support, I find that really at the root, we're talking about donor apathy. Donors don't see why they should care about your mission. As much as you may think that you are communicating it clearly, what I have found is that donor apathy is being fueled because donors are just saying, okay, but how does this relate to me? You need to, that's why you, as the communicators, you get to clarify the why for your partners. And that's a top priority so that you can grow a passionate donor base. This is about communicating in ways that inspire, that explain, that affirm why your donors should care about your org and partner with you. And I've seen this over and over again in my work. Many funding issues can be solved by more effective and strategic communications. And what I have seen is that so often what is very easily known and understood in-house is not as easily known and understood or grasped outside. And so we've got to be able to objectively, this is where outside help is key, is having someone give you a bit of an assessment of with a bird's eye view of like, okay, I hear you saying this, but I think your donors are confused here and here and here. We need to resolve that so that they see why they should care about you. Poor communications from your org, and by that I mean they're just not clicking with your donors. But those poor communications from you produce donor response that sounds like this. Meh. Right? You've heard that. Just sort of like a flat response, no energy, no enthusiasm. You'd put all this work into your communications, and then people are just like, that's fine. That is donor apathy. And that is the problem you have to tackle head on. It is discouraging, to be sure, because you don't want that. No one wants your donors to have this lack of interest and lack of enthusiasm. I do want to stress that this apathy is not a reflection on your hard work or lack of hard work, I should say, because I know I've been on the inside of nonprofit teams. Some of the most hardworking people and creative teams. I know that you are doing hard work. Um, Donor engagement is no joke. You've got emails, newsletters, campaigns, appeals. You've got all the things. And don't even get me started about social media, the weight of social media and how much work that is. I know that your team is working very hard to reach donors, but like many problems, this one is solved by working smarter and not harder. So you've got to take a little bit of a pause, like you're doing right now by coming to this session. Take a deep breath and say, okay, let's look at the root. What's going on here that's fueling donor apathy? And then let's find some solutions so that maybe you can shift some of your hard work from something that's not very effective to something that is more effective, that will connect better with donors and tell them a little bit better why it is that they should care and should raise the priority up for you and your org. So let's look at the root of donor apathy and find some solutions here. And it starts by asking some other questions. Questions like, how do you infuse your donors with passion and energy so that their interest won't wilt? How do you do that over time? How do you light a fire in your donors so they're very excited about your mission and the impact that's possible when they partner with you? How do you cultivate these loyal mission champions? This is what you want. You want these committed, passionate donors. That means you're probably going to have to change a few things that contribute to indifference and apathy. And not that it's big changes, but it's all these little changes over time that then create this environment where your donor relationships are healthy and growing and strong. In short, that's what we're here for today. You have to give them something to care about, something that stirs the heart, engages the mind, and drives them to action. You have to inspire them to partner with you for change. That's what people get really excited about. I can say with 100% certainty that your org is in the change business. Change is something that every one of us can get on board with, we get excited about, because as again, just as people living in the world, we all know the world is not a perfect place. We all live here, we work here, we have you know, social commitments here, we work and live and play, but we can look around us and we can say, "Ooh, there are some things around us that just aren't right in the world. There are injustices and calamities and troubles, and we don't like any of that. We know that there are wrongs in the world and we want them to be made right, but none of us can be experts in all of that, right? We can't all do that with an expert opinion. We don't know how to change things, but that's why your org and its expertise is needed. So we are looking, think of it as you yourself as a donor. You are looking for who can solve this problem, who can bring about the change that I want to see in the world. And that's when you start to connect with people who really care about your mission, because it's like, ooh, who I don't like to see this injustice or this problem or this issue. I want to see that change. So who can do that? Who's got the expertise and the experience and the whole framework to make a real difference here? Nonprofit orgs have the solution for the changes we want to see in the world. So your role then is to invite people to that change. Um, Maybe you are inviting change for individual people or for whole communities. Maybe it's about helping animals or keeping the whole world from collapsing. Whatever it is that your org does, you need to invite people to join you in that change and get them to see that together, by partnering together, this change is going to happen. And this is no small thing. This is where people get very excited to work with you, because your work, by partnering together with your donors, has the potential to change the world when you have the funding and when you have the partnership. But you can't do it without them, and they can't do it without you. So, how do you inspire donors and help them to understand how critical it is that the solution that you have as a nonprofit, it includes them. It's essential. It hinges on them. Donors need to see that you have a need for them to partner with you, and they need to see that it's essential, that they have a role in this world change. They have a role in achieving the mission that your org is an expert in. So when you can articulate a really clear, compelling, consistent message about your mission and the work and the solution and the world change that's possible when donors come alongside, that's when you build trust with your audience and they start to hear the same sort of messages again and again. They're like, oh, yeah, I heard that last time. Ooh, yes, I remember they said they could do this, this, and this. And now I'm seeing proof of it. And I want to get on board with that. I have a place here. The other thing is, donors need to know that you agree with them, that the world could be better, that there are things in the world that you don't like, and that you see, oh, things aren't as they should be or as they could be. Donors need to hear that your org is saying, we can't let this be. We can't let whatever's happening current be the way it is, because we know how to change it. So you need to identify and be bold and say, we actually have a solution for X, Y, and Z. Not that you're going to solve the whole thing 100%, but you're going to make a dent because you have expertise, you have a solution, you have a framework. Donors partner with you, and then the change happens. I call this the change equation. So I love looking at it like this because we've got your expertise there that's needed, everything that you have, the framework and the structure for your programs and your offering, you have that, but then you add the partner support to it, and that is where it will initiate change. It's those two things together equal the change. And the hinge here is that you have to communicate. This comes back to the communication portion. Your missional, that's a hard word to say, missional message. You have to communicate that in so many ways, lots of different layers, different channels, sharing that story with them, that you are on mission together, that they have a role, that everything you have in mind includes them, and you're going to stand with them shoulder to shoulder, working together to help initiate the change that you want to see in the world. So this story, this message, it's going to be a big picture message. It's going to be the thing that you cast out there to inspire and to inform. This is where you can make your mission irresistible to donors, prompting them to say, I've got to be part of that. So that's where that donor interest comes in, where they are willing to care a little bit more and a little bit more because they're so excited about the potential outcomes. One of the biggest hurdles that teams need to clear is the sense that their org isn't really all that inspiring. Like, we don't have a good story. We have some expertise, but we don't feel like our partners are excited about it. I hear things like this all the time. And let me just share a few things that I hear regularly. And you may hear echoes of things that you've said or thought. And so let's just talk through those, because then we're going to debunk some of these. Our mission is important, but we aren't feeding children or saving puppies, because you know what they say, that if you are helping animals or kids, then everyone's on board. And so I've heard this a lot. I've worked with a lot of different nonprofits. Not all of them have been for children or animals. But this sort of mentality will 100% affect how you talk about your work to donors. And it's already kind of going a wah wah, like, oh, we don't work with kids, we don't work with animals. And so I don't think donors would want to work with us. So not true. This sort of mentality is not going to build confidence in your donors. And it's not true, because you have a world-changing mission. Another thing that I hear a lot, our programmatic work is technical and it's hard to explain. So we don't know how to have that story go to donors. We don't know how to get them involved and get them interested in it. I agree. There are some orgs that are quite complicated, quite technical, but it's nothing that a little creative messaging won't solve. So if you're struggling with this in-house, then again, I would say you need to solve this quick. You need to find a creative messaging specialist who can help you create a framework for sharing what you do in a way that does connect with donors, because there's a way to do this that works. We don't want to sound negative by talking about the problem. I hear this all the time. And so this concern that talking about what is really going on in the world and that there really is a problem to solve, um, that you don't want to talk about it because you feel like you're going to be the negative Nelly in the group. This assumes, first of all, that donors cannot handle the very reality that they live in every day. And I say, don't underestimate your donors. We all live here. We all know what's going on out in the world. And we all know that things aren't as they could be, as good as they could be. Now, you don't have to camp out on the problem that your mission is solving, but ignoring the problem or jumping over the problem because you don't want to tell donors that part of your story, it kind of refutes the reason why your org is even in existence. And that's not really a good way to start off asking for support. Um, all of these concerns will shape how you talk to donors and how you frame your story to donors. And these are all things that they are real, but they are solvable, because what's needed here is to develop and craft a clear and compelling and consistent message, that missional message that you want to share with your donors, so that they understand there's a problem in the world. You can partner with us for the solution, and then we're going to see it change. And that's when people get really excited and they're willing to invest time, effort, and their hearts into it. How do we do this? You've got to address these things head on. And the best way to resolve these concerns is a proper case for support narrative. Um, your case for support is your story completely written out in narrative form. And that is going to help you understand how you want to talk to donors and frame up this partnership that you want to have with donors. It connects with the donors, it inspires donors to give, it inspires them to care. This is an essential tool. Now, I have heard and seen a gazillion definitions and examples of what a case for support narrative might be. So when I talk about a case for support, I'm talking about a fully written narrative. I'm seriously talking about a Word doc with words, 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 pages of words. And I'm going to explain what that is and what it contains, but it really is no frills. It's all words. It's a tool. And I'm going to share 3 things with you about why the case is going to help you communicate in a way so that donors know why they should care and why they should partner with you. And these 3 things, they should clarify a bit about what I do for developing case for support narratives. Again, would love your questions on this. I can always share a bit more, but these are high level, like, let me explain to you what a case for support is and why this tool is going to be a game changer for you. Okay, first of all, your case for support is crafted to tell donors your org's unique story. So this is crafted for the donor, from the donor's point of view, helping them to understand, what do they need to know? What is it that they need to know about your org, the situation in the world, their partnership, the change that's possible? This is the story that you want to tell again and again and again. There's no question that your mission is doing something essential. Your team is in it. You're doing it every day. You come to your desk, you're working, you're doing so many things. Um, the problem is you are in it very deep. And what I see is that it's so easy to get stuck in the weeds talking about projects and programs and tasks and meetings. And then you start talking to donors and you start talking about all the minutia and all the things that you're responsible for because it's your work and you're there every day. That's not what donors need to hear. The case for support brings you up a level or lots of levels. It brings you up to the big picture of, what are you casting for donors? What kind of vision, what kind of story do you want to tell donors about working together to get where you want to go? Your donors don't need to know all the little details. They do need to know that larger story because that's going to be rooted in your mission. It's going to cast your vision. It's going to keep things up high, and that's going to keep their interests. This is why your case is so important, because your whole team needs to be on the same page, so to speak. You need to be able to communicate all the essential pieces of your story without bogging down your donors with all of the little details that they don't need to know about. So this provides kind of like guardrails for all of your communications. Like, okay, we're all heading in this direction. We're all going to try to say the same things so that donors hear the same things and they know how to care and how to join us in this partnership. So, case narrative, here are the components of this story. We've got the crisis. We've talked a little bit about this already. What's the problem that's going on out in the world? You want to give donors something specific that they should care about, a real problem that must be solved. And lots of orgs get nervous here. They say, oh no, I don't want to sound negative. I don't want to talk about the problem. But showcasing the problem is how donors realize that they should care. So if you don't talk about the crisis, they won't know that really there's a need and that there's anything urgent that needs to be done. They don't know that their partnership needs to come on board to make a difference. The concern that you will sound negative by naming the problem, that concern that I mentioned earlier, the case solves it because the crisis is framed within the larger story. It's never just running silo, running on an island all by itself. It's always within the context of the other pieces of the story. So you have more than just the bad news to share. And here's a fun little example. I wanted to go back to that animal example because you always think that's easier if you were serving animals because they're cute. Here's a super simple example. So let's say your org is rescuing puppies. You could just focus on that. Say, let's get puppies into loving homes. And who doesn't want to do that, right? Focus on the work. We're getting puppies into homes. It's great. But that's giving your donors no context for why this is even something that needs to happen. There's no urgency, there are no consequences. Donors are like, well, I don't know, aren't puppies getting into homes already? I don't know, that's a good thing, but why do I need to be part of this? Now, when you explain why you are helping the puppies, maybe this second example, puppies are abandoned every week. Let's get them adopted into loving homes. Well, now donors say, oh no, puppies are being neglected. No one wants that. So now we have context for the work. Oh my goodness, we don't want puppies abandoned. We must do something. Let's get them into homes. So now donors know, ooh, if I don't act, puppies are being abandoned. I don't want that. That's not the kind of world I want. So let's solve that problem. So we'll come back to this, how to merge the crisis into the overarching story that you are telling. But this is just a quick example of when you skip the problem, it it removes the context that donors need to make decisions about partnering with you. And you don't want to do that. So we're going to make sure that the crisis is part of this big story. Once you have the crisis narrative fully fleshed out, pages and pages of how you want to talk about the crisis, then you move on to the good news. So we've got the bad news of the crisis. Let's go on to the good news. There is good news because you have a solution. You are addressing at least part of that crisis with your offering. You are now giving donors hope for solving the problem because they are partnering with you and you have a framework for addressing this problem at hand. So your solution, these are things outlining all of your work, meaning your large scale program work, your initiatives, and really your philosophy, your mission, vision, how you do work, and how all of that is going to change things. Then you move on to the opportunity section of this story. In the opportunity, this is where you specifically tell donors that you need them to join you. You are inviting them in lots of different ways, hopefully segmented approach in terms of the asks and the invites, but you are inviting them, giving them the opportunity to partner with you to change the world. And finally, this story lands on outcomes. You give donors a vision for a better world. You are saying, look at this change. Here are these stats. Here are these impact stories. Here's where we're headed. So it's all vision casting. Altogether, these pieces address those concerns that I mentioned earlier from your team, like the concern that your mission isn't very exciting as other orgs. Well, the case solves that because it identifies your org's unique expertise and why you initiate change. And once you have that in your tool belt, you're like, oh, I got this. I can tell this story much better. The concern that your work is too technical to inspire passionate donors, the case solves that because the solution is then crafted for the donors. It's not about getting your donors to know all of the little details of the technical elements of your work. It's giving them the big picture, the creative front to what you're doing so that they are inspired, they understand, they see how it affects them in their everyday lives. That's a messaging thing. What about the concern that you'll sound too negative by naming the problem? The case solves that because the crisis is then framed within this whole story. You have more than just bad news to share, but you do need to share what is going on in the world that you want to fix. Now, I can't stress enough how important it is that you provide those impact stacks stats. That last part of the case, the opportunity, you really need to land on that with your impact stats, your stories, your testimonials, because donors want that affirmation, that really that proof, I guess, proof of concept that their partnership was a good decision, that their choice to care and partner with you was valid. It was a good choice. It was a valid choice because it actually made a difference in the long run. 97% of donors say that impact is their top motivation for giving. So this is really important that you cast that vision and then you follow up and tell them you gave this gift And now here's the impact that you are having. Okay, the second thing about case for support narrative, what I mean by a case for support narrative, this is an internal guide for crafting your external message. This is an internal tool. It's something for your in-house team. I mentioned before that it's a Word doc, and I'm serious here. It is a Word doc that's like 10 pages, 15 pages. I've had some that I've written that have been up to 30 pages, but it's however many pages are needed to tell your story in the way that you want to tell it. It covers those 4 sections, and it becomes the tool that you use to build your communications. Here's what I mean by that. You have internal tools to create external messages and elements. Internal tools, let's talk about your brand and style guidelines. When you design graphics, you consult your branding guide and then you create graphics. When you need to write words down and craft communications, you go to your case for support and then you pull from that and you write communications. So I always think of your case for support and your brand standards as the internal tools that create the external pieces. A lot of times when people talk about a case for support, they show me a very beautifully printed brochure, which that came from a case for support, and it outlines the case for support. But behind a printed booklet that's beautifully designed with graphics would be that Word doc, and it would be your brand standards. What I see very often is that people want the booklet, but they don't want to do the work for the case. And I have found that if you do the work on the case, all of your other communications come much easier because you're pulling from your case for support words, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, and you're like, oh, I want to write an email. I'm going to grab that. I'm going to go over here and shape my email around it. So it's like you don't have to have a blank page. You already have consensus from the whole team. When we talk about this thing, we're going to say it like this. It provides consistency and guardrails, and it keeps you from staring at the blank page, and it keeps you from recreating the wheel. It helps you in your whole team to move a little bit faster on those communications. Without a case for support, your team is not going to have a North Star for your communications. And so you're either going to get stuck in the weeds, like we talked about earlier, and your donors are going to be bogged down by details they don't need to make a decision, or you're going to be so vague about your mission that donors aren't going to understand what you're really doing. So this tool ensures that your team is communicating the mission in a way that donors understand, they connect with, they're inspired by, and then they want to partner with you. Okay, third thing, your case for support is, I call it a choose your own adventure tool. This is the third thing I wanted to clarify about how I see a case for support narrative. Because this is an internal tool, it's flexible. You can create narratives from any part of that case for support. They don't have to go in order. Even though your narrative is a Word doc and it reads in full from beginning to end, kind of like a story or a novel, this document is more like a reference manual that you go and look things up and pull things out of, rather than a story that you have to read from beginning to end or it won't make sense. Because it's like, I think of it as like sourdough starter. So your case is a sourdough starter, and when you're ready to communicate, you pull off a piece and then you work with it. So you can start at any point on here because you can pull out of the opportunity, you can pull out of the solution and say, oh, I want to pull this piece off and I want to talk about it and craft a message about it. The other good thing here is that you can focus, like as a team, you can decide, we really want to stick with championing the solution, which is our programs and the donor partnership. Maybe the opportunity is in there too. You can do that. You can focus primarily on that, but weave in the crisis and weave in the outcome. So when you think about donors going on a journey with you, they need all of these pieces of the story, but you are not locked in to a linear telling of it. You can go back and forth. You can always start with opportunity and end with opportunity. You can weave in one line of the crisis here or there and everywhere, but focus primarily on positives if that's what you want. So it really is a flexible tool, and you can use it the way that you want to inform your donors fully and inspire them to give. Okay, so we're just about wrapping up here, but I want to stress that caring happens within context to that larger story. So I've already talked about how if you skip any part of that story, donors are going to be a little bit lost. And on their donor journey, you don't want donors to be lost. So the caring is always going to happen within the context of those four pieces of the case. And with the case in hand, you're going to cultivate their hearts and help them to connect with you. In my opinion, donor interest is going to wilt when that larger story is neglected. So they need that larger story told consistently over time because they're not with you. They're not at your desk. And remember, they have a lot going on. There's a lot for them to think about. So they need this consistent story so that they can move along in their journey. So here's again what happens. What I see on the ground with teams when you don't start with the case for support. Very often, most DonorCom teams start with, oh my gosh, we got to create an email. We've got to create something. We've got to communicate. And so then they start typing and then they produce the piece and then they send it out. But there's no context. And so what I want to say is, okay, back up. Again, we're taking the deep breath by attending the session and thinking through and being more strategic. We're going to back up and say, okay, but what do we do with that content? What are we trying to say? We've got to go back to that bigger story. And so this is where we pull in things like the narrative, the case for support narrative, donor segmentation strategies. How are you going to slice and dice your message to talk to different groups for different reasons? And then with all of that behind you, then you start writing. These first steps that you see there at the top ensure that everything the donor hears from you is rooted in that larger story. And it makes sure that it is crafted so that they understand when they care, they can make an impact. It ties back to my analogy of that wilting plant. Donor fatigue happens when they don't know the full story, and it's the story and the context that will cultivate the caring. So you have to remove donor empathy from the soil and replace it with your missional message. That's the only way that you are going to ensure that instead of this wilting plant, this wilting with your donors and their care, you have got to root the donors in your story time after time so that they understand their role and that they know how to care and how to partner with you. Healthy roots grow passionate donors who grow in their partnership year after year. Give your donors that full story. You need to be clear, consistent, compelling, so that they have something to care about. Now, I trust that in all of this, in everything that I've talked about, that there's something here that will help you and your team to cultivate donor caring and to help them understand your mission, help them understand their role, help them to see why caring and will lead them to partnership, will lead them to really see those outcomes and see the change that they can initiate with you when they partner with you. But that really comes to the end of my presentation for this session for today. I'd love to connect with you online. Here's my contact information, and I'm sure Jay will also provide that as well. But yeah, as we close, if I'm not sure if we have time for any questions, but Jay,
Oh, we do.
I'm
We
welcome
do.
to that. Oh, great, great, great.
Don't anybody go away. We have a
Okay.
whole bunch of
Should I
questions.
leave the screen the way it is, or should I stop sharing?
Well, in fact, I was going to suggest that Jack, our producer, that Jack put that information in the chat while he has a second,
Okay, great. Thank you.
if he can, and then that way we can have it there and available, and
Wonderful.
we'll go through the questions. So
Wonderful.
I'll do this also verbally in case someone is listening to this.
Oh,
You can find Erin at erinstraza.com. That's ERINSTRAZA.com. And of course, she's there on LinkedIn. I think she's the only one you'll find, at least in our sector, at LinkedIn. And you can send her an email at hello@erinstraza.com as well. So while Jack is putting that in, yes, please do feel free to close out the slides. And I'd love to share some of these questions with you we have a bunch here that have come in, and so I'll just go through them sequentially. So if you asked one early, I'll try to make sure we get to yours first. But there are a lot on the case statement for obvious reasons. So we'll make sure to touch on all of those
Yeah.
as soon as we can see you. We see this beautiful
Oh,
background, but we
goodness. I
can't see
forgot
you.
to hit stop share. There we go. Is that better?
I,
There we go.
yes, I don't know where that was. It was very
That
nice.
was Santorini. Oh my goodness.
Oh,
Yeah, I got to go there a couple years ago with my husband for an anniversary, and it was glorious, just like that picture.
it looks
It was great.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yes,
it
we'll
was
try to
really
hold a
nice.
future session in
That's
Santorini
oh,
live
oh, yeah, let's do that.
and
That would
invite
be
everybody
amazing.
there. We'll see if that works.
Yes.
And before we jump into the questions, just one more note for everybody here, because we're always asked this, and I think it was asked here. Yes, there is a recording of this. Yes, everyone in the room will be receiving an email in the
Great.
next 48 hours with a link to this recording. So be on the lookout for that. If you don't see it, look in your spam folder. If you can't find it, you can always contact me. You have Aaron's contact information. You can also contact me for the recording. And my email address within DonorSearch is that's Jay, at donorsearch.net. We also have some sessions coming up you won't want to miss. We only have one next week because I'll be at the Giving Institute Summer Symposium, reporting out from that in the wake of the release of Giving USA. Lots of good stuff coming from Philadelphia. If you're a Philadelphian, love to see you while I'm there. But anyway, I'll be there for the bulk of next week. And in addition, we also have a session on Thursday with Molly Delano, who is the head of Futures Ignite, wonderful organization, on 7 steps to building youth leadership on a strategy for funding your mission, with 2 special guests, 2 remarkable freshly minted high school seniors that she's been working with through the organization. Please show up for them as well as for yourself. I know you'll enjoy that. That's Thursday at 3:30 p.m. And we have a couple of podcast episodes you don't want to miss either. One is Anthony Cinero, who is one of about 120 people in the country who are living organ donors multiple times. In addition to jumping out of a plane over 2,000 times, he has a story to tell. He's the former AVP for Development at Connecticut Children's, but his personal story is well worth listening to. You can hear that starting this weekend. And then next weekend, Allison Fine, president of every.org, also a former congressional candidate and author of 4 books and a contributor of a piece just today in the Chronicle of Philanthropy. So be on the lookout for all that. And a last and final note, I promise, which is that when you leave today, you're going to see a survey pop up. That's our only way to know what you want to see and hear. Please fill that out for us, as much for you as for us. We'd really, really appreciate that. So finally, Aaron, thank you so much for this. We have a ton of questions here. Let me go ahead and jump right in. And we'll start with the one that came in first, I think, which is back here to, there we go. Would you say less frequent communications, but more tailored communication is the most effective?
Well, I would say it depends. It's real dodgy, but what I mean
Sure.
by that is it depends on the donor segment. I think that tailored communications are needed for top investors because they make decisions in a very different way as compared to your general donors population. And so general donors, I say very frequent communication and outreach. Top donors, they need some very special communications, but they need special touches. A lot of little text messages and we're thinking of you, that sort of thing. Very personal for top donors and regular. And over here for general donors, if you think of it on a spectrum, general donors, it could be a lot of touches, email, social, and maybe some mail pieces and events.
Thank you for that.
Mhm.
We also have another kind of a general order question,
Yeah.
which is about if you have any, this is from Anonymous, always my favorite attendee.
Oh,
If
great.
you have any advice for organizations that are largely government funded, I mean, this is not unusual, Anonymous. You are in good company. As they say, the government never seems to fully pay for any given program. As the former government grant maker, I know that's true. So we're left asking for unrestricted or operational funds from our donors to make up
Yep.
the difference. It's often hard to get donors on board and excited to support operating funds. Can you talk about that, maybe even in the context of the case?
Sure. Well, my feeling is, again, this is a communications challenge that is solvable. So, yes, it can be hard to say you're asking for operating funds, but that's only if you are pitting operating funds against programs. And my feeling is you need operations to run your programs. And so my feeling is those things are not at odds. And so I'm not saying you don't ever have to address it, but I sort of feel like, well, if you don't put it at odds, then why would donors ever think of that? So if you just say, we need all of this in order to make this change happen, then donors begin to trust you. So it's more or less building that trust with your donors where they say, oh, we know you actually need money to keep the lights on and to have computers. Like that's essential for running the programs. And if you just come at it openly, honestly, and say, yeah, we have all these programs, they can't run unless we're here doing it. I think it's solvable by communications, but I do feel that stress. It's more like saying, yay, we got the government grant support, and yay, we also need you. So it's inviting those donors on a different journey than your government supporters.
Right. And we've heard this question in other sessions, even about the big gifts from
Yeah.
individuals or corporations, where let's say someone gets a Mackenzie Scott gift.
Oh,
That
yeah.
sounds wonderful. And then one of the fears you hear is, can we tell the public? Because they might think that we don't need their help anymore. I
I
guess
know.
it's kind of the same issue in a
It
sense.
is. Yeah. I work with orgs that have gotten Mackenzie Scott money, and there's a whole strategy there for how do you talk about it and framing it up so that donors who are giving $25 a month don't feel like, oh, you must not need me anymore. And so again, there's that donor journey, and the case narrative does help you because within the case narrative, that opportunity section, I like to dive deep and say, let's look at all your segments and get some sample messaging out for each one of those based on the case so that you can say, oh, yeah, when we talk to our general donors on mainly on social media, how do we want to frame this up? We don't want to just blast it out. We got all the money because then people don't know what their role is. So you've got to match the channel to the message to the audience. So it's those three ways of looking at your communications.
Sure, sure. This question came in while you were talking through all those components of the case. So maybe it's just revisiting something about
Sure.
definitions. And that's from Lena, who had said, would a case study be more like a client success story?
Ooh, it can be part of it. So, the case for support narrative is going to outline, um, first of all, the crisis outside and really not even mention your org at all and just say, let's just say, there's poverty happening out there. It's bad. Like all the stats, all the support sources, experts, what you see. And then in the solution, you're going to say, we have programs that attack poverty, that will make a difference. In the opportunity and the outcomes, you may be giving examples and stories and testimonials, but those don't go in your case because your case is going to be something that stands the test of time, whereas your impact stories are going to change quarterly, annually, all the time, hopefully. And so you need a story bank to draw off of for your communications. But this case narrative, it's going to be consistent. And really, once you do that casework, it takes a lot of work, but once you do it, that's going to last you, I usually say 3 to 5 years with minor tweaks. And so that case is very high level. You can give some examples. Like if you have like the perfect testimonials that you say, this is our champion, we want to hold this person up as the poster child or whatever, you can have that at the ready, crafted and ready to go, but I wouldn't put it in the case. It's more like an asset that you would use in your communications.
Right, right. And Lena did have a follow-up,
Oh, great.
which is
Okay.
which you touched on again in your content, especially when you talked about this versus like puppies and kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but still, this is a variation on it, which is how would the case be any different if the mission is not world change centered, but more local
Yeah.
within a small mountain community in Lena's case?
Yeah. Well, I do work with local nonprofits that are county based or even just within a city or smaller region. And so those types of cases are very warm and personal in their messaging. They're very community based. And so it's really just a matter of shaping that message to meet your donors and your needs. Now, as far as it not being world changing, it changes the world for the people who live there. And so I just think that no matter what your org is, if you are doing what you do people need it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in existence. And so just keep saying, oh, this is the thing we're doing. We're changing the world for the kids down the street or the people who work over here or whatever it is. I don't even know, but students, maybe it's animals. I don't know. But just say that within this area, we are the ones doing this because we care. And now all of our friends are in on it too. So very
Right.
inclusive, bring everybody in.
Right, absolutely. Mimi had asked, do you include a history of the organization in the case for support, and should you?
Sometimes, yes. Sometimes we just do a little bit of a nod, like we've been around in for so many years, and this is what we've seen. Um, One case for support that I worked on, they wanted history, even in terms of from the beginning of the United States of America, because they are a nature-based nonprofit. They are protecting the environment and working on climate change initiatives. And they wanted to talk about how industrialization has affected our country. And so they started with um, the first peoples and how they were protecting the land, and then how it developed and developed and developed. And now this is the problem we're in. And then here's how they're addressing it. So they had, oh boy, I bet it was like 2.5 written pages of history. And again, it's just a drawn. You would never take that 2.5 pages and plop it on social or plop it on your website, but it's to give your whole team the full story. So they're like, oh, yeah, I want to write this email and I want to pull out a line about our history. I'll go to page 2 and grab that paragraph. We already have it written and it's already crafted the way we want it. And you can plug it in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess history is context for the work today.
It is.
So sometimes that's a nod, as you said, and
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
maybe if it's a
Yeah.
big history and it's a lot of context to the history, maybe it's more important.
It is. Yeah.
You
Depends
know,
on the org.
one thing I wanted to ask you, it didn't come up in the chat, but that's about the case statement for what you're doing today versus case statement for a capital campaign. Are they
Sure.
essentially the same instrument? Should we all have a case statement? Let me start there.
Yes. Everyone should have a case statement. And my feeling is once you have your org's case statement, out of that comes any type of campaign case for support type brief, like a creative brief for a campaign. Start with this and say, okay, out of all this, what do we want to say in this campaign? What do we want to say on this appeal? What do we want to say this year? I always think of the case as the starter. And obviously, since that case doesn't change a whole lot from year to year because it's what you do, um, that's when you get into creative communications and you say, okay, what's our creative theme for the year? Now we take our case and here's this year's creative theme, and we're going to always talk about our case using this creative theme for year 1. Oh, in year 2, oh, we're going to change it a little bit and we're going to talk about our case in this creative way. So that's where I'm saying it's flexible. You're pulling from it, but that doesn't mean all your writing is over, all your creative work is over. It's more like you're getting the base and the foundation set so that you can build on it and be creative, but within context so that everything lines up for your donors and they understand what you're saying from year to year.
Right. You know, as you were describing that and the reuse, Heidi had a question about this. And how do you track the pieces used from the case statement? Or do you track the pieces using the case statement to be sure you aren't over or under using bits, or maybe
Oh,
putting some messages in front of people too often, too little? I mean,
that is a really good question. I haven't encountered that where I've been tracking where or how often a particular
right.
quote has been used. Um, Usually, once that case is created, then you can start to rework your messaging in those key pieces, like your website, your annual reports, your appeals. And yes, you will probably be using similar messages. But again, if you have a creative theme, that's going to shape how you say it. But the stats that are so um, common to you and you are so used to hearing them, your donors haven't heard them.
Oh,
They
I'm
they
so
need
glad
to
you said
hear
that.
them over and over and over again. And
Right.
if your donors, like, let's say you email them quarterly, which isn't enough. Um, let's say you email them quarterly. What if they miss quarter 2? So they heard from you in January. They aren't hearing from you again till July. If you said the same thing, are they really going to remember it exactly? And if not, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, that was an important stat. I should remember that. So I just say, keep saying the same message over and over again, because if you say it in a creative way, as you're developing communications, it's going to sound fresh every time because you're not going to just copy and paste the same email and send it again. You're going to rework it and you'll come at it from a different angle. Those stats are going to help you build your case why donors really need to be part of the work.
So appreciate hearing that. Just one last question here, because it's a little off much of what we've been talking about, but so important. Alexandra had said that she was under the impression that the webinar would be addressing more of expansion of donor bases and locating donors. And you may have comments on that, but one of the things I want to say is that, of course, that's what our sponsor does. So I hope that you'll take a look at that, because that's all they do. But even if you don't, we've had many sessions in this series because the prospect research community and the prospect development community is so important to fundraising and philanthropy in general, and particularly to us here at the Philanthropy Mastermind series. But if you want to learn more about that, you can always reach out to DonorSearch. You could reach out to me. But do you have thoughts on that, Erin, especially where it relates to everything you've been talking about?
Yes. So whenever I'm working with a nonprofit, there is this concern of like, we need more donors, we need more people in the base to communicate. And I agree, like more people in there, the better. But I also have to say that there are so many donors in your file who they don't fully understand what you're doing. They don't understand their role. And if you have donors who are giving you a one-off, here's $100, here's $500, here's $1,000, that is not their best gift if you are not communicating clearly and consistently with them. And once you start to communicate clearly and invite them in a way that's consistent for their segment, then their giving is going to grow. And I'm sure all of you have seen those stats where it's so much easier to grow the donors you have into more loyal donors than to get new ones. The new ones that come in, I mean, the stats are horrific. I think it's like 9 out of 10 leave after a year. So that then shows you that you need to have a really good onboarding system and a welcoming series that gets new donors locked in. But it's easier to keep the donors you have and grow them, and then build out a way to expand the circle connections where your current donors are drawing in their circle and their friends. And yeah, that is a whole strategy in and of itself, is making sure that you are getting more donors into your file. I've found that most nonprofits have hidden pockets of donors that they haven't even thought about communicating to. And once they get this messaging part in order, then it's easier to then reach more donors by segmenting and making sure that people know what it is that they are being called into.
Absolutely, yes, because even if they have money, or even if they're giving to similar causes elsewhere, they may not know what you are up to unless you tell them, which is exactly what we've been sharing all along today. Thank you so much for that. Erin, again, I know that people know how they can reach you because it's been here in the chat. So take a look for that, folks. We were asked one last thing, which is, will the slides be coming to you? And Jack did answer that in the chat as well, which is quite simply that we usually attach them to our follow-up emails. In this case, we may or may not be able to do that, but you can always reach out to Erin for the slides, which were quite beautiful. And this recording will be posted in the next 48 hours. So I hope you'll share it with colleagues. And so all of you will get to work on writing that case, which is going to help everybody understand why your work is so important. They'll be there with you. Thank you so much, Erin. Really do appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
And thanks everybody for being here. We'll look forward to seeing you next week for a session on Thursday. And in the meantime, hopefully you'll hang out in the podcast. Until then, take care and stay cool.